Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight we are starting a new book, the fourth book of the 5 books, the Chumash. In English we call it the book of Numbers, and in Hebrew it's Bamidbar, which means in the desert, as the opening verse says that God spoke to Moshe the Midbar Sinai, in the desert of Sinai. But it's more than just that it's in the first verse. The whole book is really about 39 of the 40 years that we wandered in the desert. The book begins in the beginning of the 2nd year in the desert. We were at Har Sinai almost that entire time. And now it's time to go into Eretz Yisrael. And so in this parsha, the census is taken, the tribes are arranged in their marching orders, the number of people qualifying to be in the army are counted, the men from ages 20 to 60, and we begin the march towards Eretz Yisrael. We know that in a few portions, we'll have the incident of the spies, the 12 spies that were sent to Israel as we were approaching the land. And of course, disaster struck. They came back with an evil report, and they told people we can't defeat the people here. And so people said, let's pick new leaders and go back to Egypt. Of course, it was a disaster. This caused the people of Israel to wander for 40 years. So the book of Bamidbar are all of the incidences, the events that take place during 39 of the 40 years. And the book ends as we're about to go into Israel with a whole new generation. It's 40 years later and a whole new generation. The whole book of Devarim takes place in 37 days. It actually says it explicitly that Moshe began to say the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, on the first day of the month of Shvat. And according to tradition, Moshe passes away on the 7th of Adar, which is 37 days later. So that's just an introduction to the book of Bamidbar. But let's go back to the idea that in English, it's called the book of Numbers. So the question is why? Why isn't it called the desert, which would be a more accurate translation of the word Bamidbar? So the answer is that a number of the books in English follow a translation from the Hebrew. Bereshit in English is Genesis, which makes sense. It's the genesis of creation. But the book of Exodus is called Exodus because that's the theme. Yet in Hebrew, it's called Shemot, which means names. Here again, it's not an exact translation. It's far from it, but it's going according to the theme. If we look at this week's Parsha, it's all about numbers. That almost the entire portion is taken up with counting the different tribes, counting the Leviim, the Levites, and then counting the 4 different camps that surrounded the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and how they would march and in which order and how many people were in each tribe, how many people were in each camp. And the theme of Numbers extends into next week's Torah portion also, that a good amount of especially the first part of next week's Parsha is a continuation of more counting, more numbers of. Here it's really the tribe of Levi, the Levites, and also the Kohanim. And at the end of the Torah portion, are the gifts that are brought by the 12 princes of the tribes on the day that the Mishkan is inaugurated, which was on the 1st of Nisan. It was really the first year. But in these gifts, and the gifts are exactly the same. I write about this extensively in Orchard of Delights. I'm not going to go back over it, but I'll just mention that the different gifts are all given with numbers according to Rashi. And again, people are welcome to look into Orchard of Delights. The explanation from Rashi is some of the most far out Rashis in the entire Chumash. He explains everything according to gematrias and the numbers of the items that are brought. It's all about numbers. In other words, we wouldn't know that, but a lot of the gifts that they brought, Rashi explains them according to their gematrias. And so the first Rashi in this week's Parsha, he in a certain way wants to answer a question: why so much counting? This is not the first time that the Jewish people have been counted. A number of times in the Torah goes into great detail about counting Bnei Yisrael. And so Rashi says this is done out of great love of God for the Jewish people. He wants to keep tabs. He wants to know exactly how many people are there because he values each and every person. And especially after the sin of the golden calf. So back then, everyone was counted. And Rashi says it's because many people died as a result of the sin of the golden calf, and that God wanted to know, well, how many people are left? And here also, because we're about to go into Eretz Yisrael, or at least that was the plan. So out of great love, God counts the people. And so what is the total? The total, after counting each tribe, is 603,550. That's the total that is given, 603,550. Now, what's very interesting here is in the previous census, which was approximately, not exactly a year before, but it was considerably before, it was the exact same number, 603,550. So there's discussion among the commentaries, and there's different opinions. How could it be the exact same number? Because we know that many people died after the golden calf. And also, is that to say that no one else died during this whole year? Anyways, there's different opinions, but the fact is that in both counts, which are about, I'm just going to say approximately a year apart, there's the exact same number. Yet, in Jewish tradition, this number is spoken about a lot, but it's rounded off to 600,000. And we're told that this is not the total amount of people who came out of Egypt. This is the amount of men between 20 and 60. Because it makes clear that this was like an induction count. We're about to go into Eretz Yisrael, and we need to conquer the land. So the army has to be organized. So the count, the 600,000, or to be exact, 603,550, is the men between 20 and 60 who are of army age. Yet, in Jewish tradition, rounds the number off, and it speaks about 600,000. And the Arizal explains the importance of this number, which comes up in many midrashim, where it talks about the 600,000 who came out of Egypt, the 600,000 who came into Eretz Yisrael, and 600,000 Jewish souls who will be in existence at the time of Mashiach. Well, so everyone asked, well, there were obviously more souls than that because there were the women and the children and even the men under 20 and over 60. So what's the significance of this number, 600,000? So the Arizal explains that this number is so important because that's how many root souls there are in Israel. Meaning, let's say now there's approximately, depending on who's counting, 13, 14, 15 million Jews in the world, which is such a small number in comparison to the whole world. Nonetheless, the question is, well, if there are 15 million people, how can there only be 600,000 root souls? So the answer is, and this is very, very important in the whole teaching of reincarnation, in the way that the Arizal explains it, is that root souls, there can be many, obviously, many, many, many souls that are coming from the same root. And so therefore, in every generation, there are 600,000 root souls, which means, as I said, that you could have tens or scores or even hundreds of souls all coming from the same soul root. Ultimately, we're taught that all 600,000 souls, in a sense, are parts of one total soul. And we have this expression, Kol Yisrael Arevin Zelazeh. All of Israel is responsible one for the other. This word, Arevin, responsible, the same root it's the name of the evening prayer, Ma'ariv. What does Ma'ariv mean, actually? It means mixing, where light and dark is being mixed. It's a change from day to night. And so there is what we call twilight, where there are, around sunset, where for 30, 40 minutes, you can actually watch it go from light to dark. And that's what Ma'ariv means. So when we say all of Israel is responsible one for the other, it can also be read, all of Israel is mixed up together, one within the other. Because, as I said, many people are sharing the same root souls. And ultimately, these 600,000 root souls are all part of a all-inclusive soul of Israel, which is called Klal Yisrael, the totality of Am Yisrael. The Zohar, and what I'm going to say is something that almost everyone has heard, says there are 600,000 letters in the Torah. And therefore, since there's 600,000 root souls and 600,000 letters in the Torah, every root soul is connected to a letter in the Torah. Now we have a slight problem here, because if you will count the letters in the Torah, we have about half of 600,000, 304,805. That's an exact count of how many letters in the Torah, 304,805. So the question is, so how could the Zohar say there's 600,000 letters in the Torah? And so there's a number of ways to answer it. The two most prevalent answers are that we have this tradition that the Torah is written black fire on white fire. What does that mean? The black fire are the letters of the Torah. What is the white Torah? That is the parchment, meaning between each letter there's a white space, and above it and below it. In other words, each letter is encircled by a white space, and that's called white fire. And we're told that the white spaces between the letters have meaning. And we're told that only at the time of Mashiach will we really understand the white fire. So since the black fire is about half of the 600,000, so when you put the black fire and white fire, again, it's rounded off to 600,000. The other way of answering it is that many letters in the Torah are actually a composite of a number of letters. We'll just take the first letter, an aleph. So we're told that an aleph is actually made up of 3 different letters. It's a yud above, a yud below, and a slanted vav between them. So there's actually 3 letters. Not all letters are like that. Many of the letters are just the letter that they are. Others are composite letters. And so one of the explanations is if you count all the composite letters within the 22 letters, you will come up with, again, the rounded off number of 600,000. So there's a beautiful teaching that I'm going to show you that we're told that one of the what are called Roshei Tevot, if you take the word Yisrael, and it's actually called Notirokon, when you take each letter of a word and that letter becomes a word itself. So the 5 letters of Yisrael become 5 words. And so here I'm just going to show it here. So here is the Yud of Yisrael, the Shin, the Resh, the Aleph, and the Lamed. But what does it spell out? Yesh Shishim Riboa Otiyot LeTorah. There are 60 10,000s of letters in the Torah. The largest letters in the Torah is the number 10,000. It's called a riboa, a multitude. So we don't have in the Torah itself 600,000. We have 60 10,000s. So the name Yisrael stands for there are 60 10,000 or 600,000 letters in the Torah. And as the Zohar says, that each Jew has a letter in the Torah. And this was revealed by a commentary called the Megale Amukot. He wrote a book called the one who reveals the depths of the Torah. Megale Amukot. It's explained, and it's very close to an exact number. In 1948, when the state of Israel was declared, there were approximately, for real, 600,000 Jews in Israel. When the state was declared in 1948, not just between 20 and 60, but total, with men, women, children, there were about 600,000. And many of the ancient midrashim say also that when Mashiach comes, he will come for the 600,000 souls. Again, here we're talking about root souls. So this is just a very interesting thing, that this is the source of this concept of 600,000 souls and their importance throughout history. Okay, so now we want to move on to build on these ideas. And we're going to go back to the Rashi, who explains why so much counting. And so he says it's out of great love of God. He wants to know exactly how many Jews there are, because each one is important. Now, if we go back, and we could say, if the meaning here is that not that everyone's counted, but everyone counts. But then we could ask, well, so why are you only counting the men between 20 and 60? So that's where the midrash comes in, that says there were 600,000 men between 20 and 60, but there were also 600,000 women and 600,000 children. So again, this number, and we could call it a symbolic number, but we understand that the counting was exact. The counting was not rounded off. 603,550. And if you add up how much were in each tribe, that's the number you would get to. But here, we could take this and in a way turn it around, that God is counting the souls of Israel because each soul is precious, each soul counts. And we know the tradition that if you have a Sefer Torah and even one letter is missing, then the Torah becomes pasul. It becomes not usable when publicly reading it. You can fix it, but if during a public reading, if a mistake is found, a letter is missing, an extra letter is there, the letter is broken, the ink is broken off, it becomes not usable. And so we're told it's the same thing with the Jewish people. This idea that we're all 600,000 root souls are part of a all-encompassing one soul. And if even one is missing, it's as if all of Israel is not complete. So this is quoted extensively in Jewish tradition, this idea, and it's actually a verse in the book of Shmuel, where Shmuel says that God won't leave anyone behind. Lo yidach mimenu nidach. No one will get left behind. Everyone is important. Everyone counts. So here we can turn it around, and this is the point I want to make now, the idea of numbers in the Torah. Because we could ask a question, if the Torah is eternal, and it is, and every Torah portion, every mitzvah, every story has eternal archetypal meaning for each person in every generation. So we could ask, why do we have to know the exact number of each one of the tribes from 3,300 years ago? What is that telling us today? So we already actually answered the question, because it's one thing to say everyone counts. That's a pretty general statement. But if God takes the time to instruct Israel to count everyone. So the teaching is in that method. This is what in the 1960s, and I quote this in Orchard of Delights, Marshall McLuhan said, the media is the message. In other words, the way you show something, that becomes part of the meaning, and sometimes it becomes the vehicle for the meaning. So it'd be one thing for God to say, the total number, the Torah could have said that God commanded Moshe to count everyone in Israel. And Moshe counted everyone, and the total was 603,550. The Torah, in theory, could have said that. But here it goes through in great depth to show us, that's the message here, that's the medium is the message, that no, it means counting each and every person individually. And especially in a world like we live in now, where everything's numbers and algorithms and, identity numbers and credit card numbers, everything is numbers. Even when you check out of a store now, it's all coded into numbers. And so it's really easy to get lost in the bigger picture. So we look at the numbers in the Torah and we analyze them and we find meaning in them. And that's why a scribe, someone who writes the Torah, or writes mezuzot or tefillin or megillot, the one who writes this, the scribe, is called a sofer. You would think, though, that the person writing maybe would be called a katvan, the writer. But he's called a sofer, which means the one who counts. What does this mean? It means that there is a numerical code running through the entire Torah. That's one of the levels, one of the many levels, is the entire Torah can be understood as a mathematical code. And we know that because each letter equals a number. And so every word has a numerical value. And so out of our love of Torah, just like God counts because of his love for us, we count the numbers in the Torah and try to find deeper meaning in them out of our love for Torah, because God gave us his Torah, and we understand that it's infinitely deep. And so all the numbers in the Torah have significance. So for those who went through a whole year, we went through this book, 70 Faces. Many of you watching tonight went through the whole year, 70 Faces. And the subtitle is called Traditional Methods for Revealing Inner Dimensions of Torah. And what we explained, based on the idea that there's Shivim Panim LeTorah, there's 70 faces to the Torah, meaning there's 70 perspectives. There's 70 ways of looking at the Torah. The Arizal said there's 600,000 faces to the Torah. Why? Because each person, each root soul, has a letter in the Torah, and which means they have their own unique perspective. So this book, 70 Faces, the idea was, well, how do we come up with the deeper meanings in the Torah? So here we have 70 methods of how the sages and later Rebbes and Kabbalists and mystics would look at the letters and the words in the Torah, and because they had certain methods, they were able to explore and reveal the inner dimensions of the Torah. I'm mentioning this because of the 70 methods that I explain in this book, 21 of them, approximately 40%, have to do with numbers. And this is because there is a whole numerical code, a whole numerical strata of wisdom hidden in the letters and the words of the Torah. So I'm just, without giving the explanations or examples for those who went to the series, so each one of these I bring anywhere from 7 to 15 exact examples. But we have gematria, which means the numerical value of each letter in a word, and the total. Then we take it and we see if other words have the same total. And if they do, then we look for correspondences between them, which reveals tremendously deep insight. Rashi, as I explained in next week's Torah portion, uses gematria extensively. And throughout the Chumash, every once in a while, Rashi will bring a gematria. The Talmud brings gematria. Of course, the Kabbalah and Hasidut weigh very, very heavily on gematria to reveal inner dimensions of the Torah. Then we have gematria of words, but then we have gematria of verses. Whole verses have larger numbers, but those have significance as well. Here in our parsha, each tribe has a number. These numbers are fairly big, and to be honest, most of these numbers are still a mystery to us because they're very large numbers. But we'll see that in our generation, Rav Ginsburg is really the master of the numerical codes running through the Torah, and has revealed thousands, tens of thousands of innovative ideas based on the numbers in the Torah. And in many cases, he'll take big numbers and show that it's two numbers times each other. Let's say the number is 60,000. So he'll show that it's this number multiplied by this number equals 60,000. And then by analyzing these smaller numbers, we come to understand the bigger numbers. Then there's what's called mispar katan, where we reduce, like 200 is reduced to 20, and 20 can be reduced to 2. 400 can be reduced to 40, 40 can be reduced to 4. So you take a number that has a larger gematria, and we reduce it to its smallest component. And again, see other words that have the same value. And that reveals deeper ideas. Then there's a whole set of numbers beyond gematria. How many letters in a verse? How many words in a verse? And for example, the Baal Turim lived approximately 1,000 years ago. And his commentary brings almost all of these different methods, all 70. He was a master, and he was one of the most important links between earlier generations and later generations, because he had the tradition, the Masorah. So how many letters in a verse? How many words in a verse? How many letters in a passage? How many words in a passage? How many words in a Torah portion? And for example, most people have the art scroll Chumash. If you look at the end of each parsha, it will tell you how many verses in that parsha and a innovative idea of what's the connection that this particular parsha has these many verses. That's in the Art Scroll. The Art Scroll is not a Kabbalistic or Hasidic commentary, but it's part of our tradition that these numbers are very, very important. Then there's square numbers. Rav Ginsburg very heavily depends on finding deeper meanings through squared numbers. Multiplying numbers. Let's say you have two words and you multiply them. You get a larger number. Well, what is that telling us? Then you can add two words together. Then the significance of where letters, words, or verses are in their placement. For example, this past parsha, Bechukotai, was the 33rd portion of the Torah. And it just turns out that every year, the 33rd day of the Omer, Lag BaOmer, will come out during this parsha. And again, every parsha is numbered up to 54, but that has significance. And I'm not even going through all of these, but then there's numbers connected to time, numbers connected to measurements. This is especially in the Mishkan. Especially in the Mishkan, where the dimensions of every article in the tabernacle is spelled out. Well, each one of these numbers has significance. And of course, there's scores of commentaries over the years to explain these. So I'm just mentioning this, that 21 of the 70 methods of coming up with the deeper dimensions of the Torah are through the numbers. And so in English, when the book is called the Book of Numbers, again, it's not an exact translation, but it's definitely connected to the first two Torah portions of this book, Bamidbar, and next week is Naso. But much more, it's really telling us, anytime you see a number in the Torah, pay attention. Pay attention. And that, again, most of it is hidden. We have to figure it out through the gematrias and the different ways that we apply the numbers. Okay, now I want to give over a very interesting Torah I saw in the Netivat Shalom from the previous Slonim Rebbe, his classic book, Netivat Shalom. And I just found it very interesting. So I want to try to give it over. So here, give me a second. I have to find the verse. Give me 1 minute here. Okay, so when the Torah begins the census, the count, so it says like this: Se'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael lemishpachotam lebeit avutam b'mispar shemot kol zachar legululotam. So very interesting, and many commentaries go very deep into this. It doesn't say count the entire congregation of Israel. It says Se'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael, lift up the heads of the entire congregation. So this idea of lifting up the heads is this idea of making people feel like they count. that they're not just a number in a big group. Everyone has their time, everyone has their place, everyone is given a chance to shine. So that's what it means, Su'u et Rosh B'nai Yisrael. The idea of making people feel important, counted, significant, noticed, appreciated. All these different ideas are explored because of this language. And then it continues, and it says, you should count them to their families, to their father's house. And this is the main thing I want to get to. It says, B'mispar shemot, in the number of their names. Kol zechar legulotam. Because again, the counting here is the men between 20 and 60 who are of army age. So the Solomon Rebbe points out in the other censuses that are taken in the Torah, it does not say b'mispar shemot, according to the number of names. So he wants to explain why here do we have this idea. So he explains that here we're talking about what are called the door that came out of Egypt, the generation that came out of Egypt. Now that's not the same generation that goes into the land, because during the 40 years, all the men between 20 and 60 pass away, and it's a whole new generation that comes into the land. And so in Jewish tradition, there's a difference made between these two generations. The generation that comes out of Egypt is called Dor Deah, the generation of knowledge. And they're considered to be on a very, very high level, higher in many ways than the generation that goes into the land. But here the Slonomer Rebbe, and what's interesting is there's this idea that when you're learning something and you have a question or something pops out at you, and then you continue learning, and it's like whoever wrote this piece says the same thing. You know, as you're one step ahead. So that's considered like a great honor or merit that you're on the same wavelength as the person who's writing this piece. So when I'm reading this, the first question that comes up to my mind is, if it's such a great generation, how did they come to sin so many times? Not just the golden calf, and not just the spies, but the whole book of Bamidbar. Some people refer to this book as the book of mistakes, because there are many, many mistakes made here. And so the question is, and the Slonomer Rebbe asked the same question, if they're on such a high level, how did they fall so many times? How did they fall short of the mark so many times? And they did not merit coming into the land. That's his question. So he answers it in a number of ways. So first of all, and he says, because if you look in the book of Yoshua, when Yoshua passes away, so the book says that the whole time that Yeshua was leading the Jewish people in conquering the land, everyone kept the Torah. It wasn't like the generation in the desert, that there was all these rebellions, and let's go back to Egypt and golden calves, and the book of Yeshua says the people followed the Torah. No kunsim. So that makes the question even stronger. So why do we call this generation that came out of Egypt such a great generation? So the Torah explains a general principle that is not easy to understand, but it's a very big reality, where the sages say the bigger the neshama, the bigger the evil inclination. We would think just the opposite. Our logic would tell us that the greater the neshama, then the greater control that they have over their Yetzer Hara, and it's less of a problem. But the Gemara says just the opposite. The greater the neshama, the greater the evil inclination. But this needs explanation, because here we're talking on a more subtle level, that we're not talking about the desire to sin or a weakness in the face of the Yetzer Hara. We're talking more on refined midot. And so the greater the neshama, so the greater their influence, the greater their power. And so that leads to, in many cases, pride, or it could be arrogance, or lack of sensitivity, because they don't understand, not everyone's on their level. So that's one of the ways he explains it, is this was in truth a very, very great generation. But they also had a huge Yetzer Hara. And he brings as an example, very interesting, of Yosef. When he is in the house of Potiphar, so we know that Potiphar's wife really desired to be with Yosef sexually, and was constantly trying to elicit his agreement. And at one point, he says to her, he says, there's no one greater in this household than me. Because the Torah says that Potiphar trusted him so implicitly, he turned over everything. He didn't know what was coming in, what was going out. Yosef was running the whole house. And so Yosef said, there's no one greater than me. How could I do such a great sin by sleeping with his wife? So the Solomon Rebbe explains, well, this sounds like it's a formula for disaster. He's like, no one greater than me. But he explains that sometimes when faced with the Yetzer Hara, we do have to kind of build ourselves up to the point that we can say to the Yetzer Hara, do you know that I have a divine soul? Do you know the power that I have? Do you think I'm going to let you make me sin? And many times it will work, because if you take the opposite, I'm a nobody. No one cares what I do or don't do. I don't even think God cares. So what's going to stop us from sinning if we think so low of ourselves? He said, but Yosef understood what a great neshama he was. But at the same time, the solution was, he actually was quite humble about it. And that answers why when his brothers come down, he had every, logically at least, or even humanly, every reason to take revenge, every reason to really get back at them. Instead, he engineers this whole plan to get them to do tshuva, and then he brings the whole family together, and he explicitly forgives them all and wants only the family to be together. But the Slonim Rebbe said that the generation of the Midbar, they didn't know the secret of humbleness. that they became arrogant, they became prideful, and they became prey to the Yetzer Hara. Meaning, even though they were great souls, we even say that when Moshe sent the 12 spies, the Torah says explicitly, these were great people. They were great people. And this is really a paradigm shift when we look at people that we look up to. And sometimes we think they don't have any problems. They don't have any challenges. They've conquered everything. But it's not true. It's not true. The greater the soul, the more responsibility that they have, the more, in Hebrew, achrayut, which is responsibility. They carry it on their shoulders, and the smallest mistake in our character can have tremendous consequences, whereas someone, as it were, on a lower level, that kind of mistake wouldn't be such a major thing. But someone who's in a position of power and influence, slight mistakes in thought, speech, and action can have sometimes disastrous effects. And so there's a phrase for this. It's in Aramaic. Man de'ihu rav, ihu za'ir. The one who is great is actually very small. Man de'ihu za'ir, who rav. And the one who is small, he is great. So what is this talking about? It's talking about specifically the idea of pride and the arrogance that pride can lead to. If someone thinks that they're great and acts accordingly and gives off the vibes that they know how powerful they are or rich they are or influential they are, that in God's way of looking at things, they're quite small. And someone who is truly humble, in God's eyes, they are great. So that's the explanation that the generation who came into the land, after seeing what happened for 40 years and how we had to wander because of the various sins and rebellions that happened, that generation, in a certain way, maybe not have been as great, but they knew the secret of humbleness. And so that when they entered the land, it was with a certain level of humbleness that they took upon themselves the task of coming into the land of Israel. And we see actually a beautiful connection that when the spies came back, and they said, it's a beautiful land, absolutely beautiful, very fruitful. They brought back the fruits, but they said, but the people are too strong. There's no way we'll be able to conquer them. And so they scared the people, and the people said, let's go back to Egypt. But Caleb spoke up. Two of the spies were Caleb and Joshua. And Caleb spoke up and he said, Tova ha'oretz ma'od ma'od. The land is very, very good. And we can go into the land. God promised us, and God will help. And of course, we can come to Eretz Yisrael. But the way he said it was, ha'oretz tova ha'oretz ma'od ma'od. Very, very good. Ma'od ma'od. And so the Slonim Rebbe points out that in Pirkei Avot, so it says about humbleness, it says ma'od ma'od hi shafel ruach, that a person should be lowly of spirit very, very much. Again, this doesn't mean a lack of self-esteem. It doesn't mean being a floor mat for other people to walk over. The most humble person in the entire world was Moshe Rabbeinu. And he was such a strong leader, such a strong leader. So his humbleness did not in any way diminish his strength. In fact, it gave him more strength. And so again, ma'od, 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 ya shafel ruach. So this is a beautiful Torah from the Slonim Rebbe, and it's very, very appropriate for our day. Everyone knows that before the Yom Kippur War, we had just 6 years before, we had this incredible victory in the 6-day war. And there was a certain level of arrogance that we're on top of everything here and we have everything under control, but they didn't. And we could say the same thing happened on October 7th, that the government, the army, the intelligence, the people became complacent, lost track of the actual reality that was happening here. And everyone thought, we're on top of it. No one can challenge us. No one can bother us. It was a huge mistake. So here, this teaching from the Slonim, those who think they're great are actually quite small. And those who are small, they are quite great. And here, after October 7th, so we saw this incredible volunteerism in the Jewish people that just welled up. And that's the level of those who are humble and give of themselves. They are the great ones. So on that merit, we should see better days, and we should see a true victory of light over darkness.